All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Late Night Snacks. It is me, as always, your host, Emilio Villarruel, joined with the co-host, CEO, and co-founder of OrderEZ, Jeff Meese.
Hello. Good to be
Hello,
back.
hello, welcome. And back not just in terms of another episode, but back in Singapore after, pardon me, after a lengthy trip stateside. How was that, Jeff?
It is so exciting to see travel coming back. All personal stuff aside, just to see kind of some of the world returning to normal. I got to go back and spend some family time. My father retired, which was really exciting. Had a great party. Um, Probably the most exciting piece from an OrderEZ perspective was the fact that this trip dovetailed into the last week being spent at the Craft Brewers Conference in Minneapolis, which was it's been a long time since I've been in a room with 9,500 people, but it
Me too.
was awesome. Yeah, we haven't had groups of nine for most of the last 2 years. So once you add a couple zeros to that, it was pretty intimidating at first. I will admit, but it was it was starting to feel like pre-pandemic in many ways, but in many ways it was
Mhm.
still very much in the back of everybody's mind. So I was still testing between destinations. There was non-mandatory mask wearing just out of safety for yourself and for other people that you care about and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was an event that could make you forget that we've been living in this world for the last few years. And um, having started the company and really kind of launched the company during the pandemic, being able to kind of get out there and just have hundreds of conversations over the course of a couple of days was just invaluable. I have to say, you have these notions, you read, you talk to a few people here and there, but just the amount of information you can kind of glean from having that many people in one place who are all thinking and talking about the same thing was spectacular.
There is something to be said about just like getting a group of people together and brainstorming, talking, sharing insights on a singular subject. And I imagine there were quite a few rather passionate folks about beer, maybe, possibly there. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely.
before we proceed forth, I do want to cheers to the return of travel
Mm.
and also introduce what drinks are we talking about today, Jeff?
It's a fashionable evening. It is the old fashioned and the rum fashioned. So, cheers.
Cheers to that.
I was sorely disappointed when I opened my fridge tonight and did not find an orange. So, I did not have an orange garnish, but I did have a Luxardo cherry, which, although imparting different flavor, it's a spectacular flavor to impart.
There, it's just one of those things, and often imitated, never recreated personally. There's really a distinct difference.
Yeah, they are special. They are super special. And I will label out Eagle Rare Bourbon Old Fashioned, um, with Angostura bitters and simple syrup. 2-to-1 simple syrup. Stir it down, pour it over ice, drop in a cherry, and enjoy.
I had almost the exact same recipe, though obviously in my case I subbed the whiskey in my case for Don Papa rum, and I mean at this point, I do sound like a broken record when it comes to how often I plug Don Papa. I will say, full disclosure, I did not receive monetary or alcoholic compensation from Don Papa, though at this point I should. And yeah, it's smooth. Now I did. I'll be honest. I did have to riff on it a little bit out of curiosity. Lacking a maraschino cherry, I thought, well, how do I want to just give it a little bit of an accent, add a little English to it, we'll say. Um, so I put just a dash of mango liqueur.
Oh, interesting. Like I'm trying to
I
think.
felt like with Don Papa,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about the flavor profiles, and you said mango liqueur,
yes,
and it's mango season, so very of the moment.
it's how I like to live my life, Jeff. Just in the moment right there. So to that, cheers again. And I'm a fan of this drink. It's tasty.
I haven't had one in a while. It's one of those very simple drinks. One of the earliest and most classic of cocktails. You know, brown, bitter, and a little bit of sugar. Get it right, balance perfectly. You can get it wrong though. You can definitely get it wrong, out of balance, and
It's,
obviously.
I'm not generally one for brown liquor overall. I'll go to it, of course, and I've gone at length about my love for rum and whatnot. But it's one of those things where, for people who do drink brown liquor, when you go to a bar, if you order an old fashioned, it's a good way to get a measure of just exactly what the bar's got going on. If they mess it up, there's a good indication that there's going to be a lot of things that are messed up there.
Your next drink will be a glass of wine or a beer, because they're predictable.
Or a soft drink in a to-go cup if it were me, depending. But you never know.
Yeah.
Uh, but so going and kind of harkening back to what we are cheersing for, and I think it always a good practice to remember the reason for those things. In this case, being the return of travel, something which you've gotten a chance to enjoy recently. I'm excited for my upcoming trip stateside. Um, you have all of these different brewers together. I'm sure you have a lot of like brewery adjacent services. You have a lot of different distributors there. What was it that were some real takeaways that you got from that experience? That you got from, let's say, kind of the collective mind share think tank of a bunch of really boozed up, really enthusiastic individuals?
Yeah, and in terms of plugging the CBC, like although I haven't been to a conference in a long time, so like putting that aside, I thought that they put together like a really well-rounded conference that offered kind of a choose your own adventure path to the week. Um, and if you wanted to geek out on hops, you could geek out on hops and kind of extraction. And there's a whole session. There's an hour and a half session on yeast. I mean, so there's kind of everything there for you, depending on what you wanted. Obviously, the path that I chose and the direction that I went on most of my kind of my events during the day were around the software aspect, the distribution aspect, and kind of the more operation side of the business. So less the creative kind of product creation, more of taking that product and, hey, we've made this great beer. How do we get it to the world? So that's where I really focused my attention, and those are the things that I chose to go to. So, yeah, I was scouting competitive software programs. Like, what am I not going to go listen to the speech and hear what they have to say? There was some great takeaways from that. But if I had to kind of boil down a couple of the big takeaways that I got, on one side, it was I've been away from the U.S. I worked for a craft brewery, a group that had a craft brewery. So I was selling craft brews in 2000, when it was still very early days. Um, and I should have realized this, but the number of distributors or the number of breweries has increased, up to just shy of 10,000 from, and in 2000 the number was probably 200 across the states. So it was the industry has exploded, but I kind of put the breweries into really two core camps. And this is once again through the lens of, hey, I run OrderEZ, and this is the things that I care about and think about. But thinking about how the breweries kind of segmented themselves and how they talked about themselves, there was a camp of brewers who are making beer to sell in their bars, restaurants, and tap rooms. So we're going to make beer, and we're going to sell it in our bars and restaurants and tap rooms at great margins because we produce it. There's nobody in the middle in some instances. We can kind of talk about that, and sell it by the pint. So you can kind of highest retail value, and you're producing it yourself. So it's a great business model. And they had no interest and had, not even contemplating distribution or wholesaling to anyone else. It was just, I make beer for my bars, restaurants, and tap rooms. And then there was the other group that was, I want to make beer, and I want to make lots of beer for everybody. Yes, I might have bars, restaurants, and tap rooms of my own, but I also want to start expanding outside of my home market. I want to go into adjacent states, adjacent cities, across the country, and out into the world. So that was a big piece of it. Um, The other big one that was a huge takeaway, and there was a big session on distribution rules and kind of just talking about, the legal construct of distribution agreements. And that was one that I had read a lot about, but I'd been so far away from the US and had been so far kind of removed from the nitty gritty details of how that worked, that to hear the panel talking about, it really drove home like just how skewed the system really is to those distributors. It just puts a tremendous amount of power in their hands, and for those breweries, they have to be super cautious before entering into the agreements because in most cases, they're very, very, very hard to break or very expensive to break. And that to me was,
And
yeah,
sorry, Jeff, I have to interrupt, and I'm sorry because I assume at this point that anyone listening likes you, and I may endanger that by revealing some information. But some little known information, uh, just to add a little bit more context to what you're talking about, is that prior to OrderEZ and kind of your forays into the F&B field, you're also classically trained in the legal field and a professional lawyer.
yeah,
So
no,
you're
yeah,
speaking from a different context. I think it's just important for the listeners to be like, oh yeah, this guy actually maybe is looking at it, with a different pair of eyes.
no, that's a very fair point. Between that and having built a distribution business, I could put on my ex distributor hat and be like, oh my god, that would be absolutely amazing to have some of the protections that the U.S. law affords you. Like, hey, if they're going to take away your distribution, if they want to break the agreement, they have to pay you out and buy you out of it. All that's only by contract here. Um, and it's more of an open negotiation in terms of what you can get. And then there is the legal kind of the legalese jargon and kind of nuances of it, which is pretty fascinating stuff. But there were a couple of lawyers on one of the panel who were practiced specifically in this field, and I may be a lawyer, but I'm not a beer lawyer. I'm not a kind of alcohol lawyer in the States. So I can understand it on a high level, but these were people who practice it every day, and they were echoing a lot of the things that we said that I had read about and thought, and the theses that I had formed. Like, if I were a craft brewer, what would I be thinking about? So that was really great. It was, hey, don't jump into these. You know, uh, take your time. There's no such thing as a standard agreement. Everything's negotiable, and um, it comes down to a lot of it comes down to what kind of leverage you have in this. And so many people get into the brewery business because they want to make great beer. They were probably home brewers and different things, and it just yeah, really, you can see how people have gotten themselves in situations that they didn't enjoy, um, and just trying to help people avoid that as much as possible.
And so, kind of with that, I'm curious. What would be sort of your recommendation to avoid that to start off? And I know that you mentioned something about like there being a lot of fascinating discourse and kind of rapid developments on the home front over in Minnesota when discussing legality around craft beer distribution and mind you, as a complete layman, I may be misrepresenting that. I'm not sure, but I'm asking you, um, you know, what's new there, or is there something there to look out for, which makes the space in maybe a particularly ripe position for change or for growth in some direction?
Yeah. So funny thing. So when I was in the States, I was in Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Those were my 5 states that I hit in the 3 weeks, which was a bit grueling, but it was super fun. Um, and of those 5 states, and I think this is representative of what's happening in the US, in those 5 states, Kentucky in 2022 has changed their rules about what breweries can do to self distribute, expanding their ability to self distribute. Nebraska has expanded or enabled their first opportunity to self distribute. And Minnesota is also doing the same thing in terms of increasing the scale at which you can self distribute. Minnesota has a couple of the really, not the really big, but like regional distributors of scale or regional breweries of scale. Um, Surly is one that came up a lot. They made a ton of great beer. They were all over the place at CPC, but they're getting bigger, and they were kind of bumping up against that definition of what it means to be a a micro or craft distillery in the state. And the state seems to be taking some action to kind of expand that. And I think that's exciting. I think that was, from a legal perspective, I think kind of across the board, you're seeing states. Some of it was fueled by the pandemic and the rules that these temporary rules that they expanded for people, but a lot of it is also kind of taking root and saying, oh, you know what, these guys, they're small scale operations. We should let them do a little bit more themselves. So coming back to what would my advice be, I over the course of the last 48 hours, I've probably sent 10 emails that said this. It was self distribute as long as you can, as long as you're legally allowed to do it. You should self distribute. You will reach a cap at which you can no longer do it. There's just so much margin to collect. Two, you get to build your brand the way that you want to build your brand. So you get to control it. It's your team out there talking to the bars, restaurants, and retailers who are the ultimate kind of microphone for or megaphone for what your message is and what your brand is. And there's no intermediary. Um, there's no jostling and fighting about which products are going to get taken to market. So you'll get, one of the common themes that you heard was distributors would take my core range, but they didn't want to take all of my rotating products, or they didn't want to take much of my rotating products because it's just a lot of work. Well, there's a rub there between consumer interest and what makes you a great brand and what makes you an interesting brand to consumers, and what's uh, really cost effective from a scaled up distributor.
Uh,
And
and real quick, can we just I do want to kind of take a beat on that, to sort of explain kind of what their perspective is, because I think from, you know I've been thinking about, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the old quote about kind of how do you identify pornography. Like, I don't know how to identify it, but I'll know it when I see it. And I used to feel the same way about craft, brands, but now it's like it's getting harder to tell. The landscape is getting more sophisticated, and you have to wonder, well, where is it and when is it that you see those cases? And largely, I'd say it's when the distributor or the company in house is justified. Hey, it's worthwhile. We can see that. Hey, if we develop or invest X amount of time and dollars into the marketing and the research and development for the actual like flavors and the product line, like if we have these rotational things coming up and really kind of get funky with it to put it in professional jargon. Um, they can see at some point, or at least at that point, hey, the juice justifies the squeeze.
yeah.
But if you're not them, if you're not, and mind you, a lot of my inspiration for this talking point comes from, I have a big bottle of Hendrix Amazonia right
Oh,
next to me,
okay.
and just because I think of Hendrix as one of those spirits brands that and this is something that we've kind of discussed a little bit, that kind of operates like a craft beer brand.
Hmm.
They like to have those rotational lines, things like that. Um, I think that it's important, when you're having into the discussion about why you self distribute. Well, maybe it's not about why you self distribute, but why you self distribute right now. You may need some time to establish that proof of concept. Say, hey, look, in the event that we go ahead and put out a rotational line, you're going to see that our sales numbers go up by X percent or Y percent, or our social mentions go up by Z percent. These indicators that you can then say, all right, now when I'm shopping it to a distributor, here's why you want to go ahead and justify having a guy like me come in and do all that extra work.
No, that's absolutely what it is. And it comes down to data as well. Having the data to back up those statements. Having your taproom data is good, and that will engender some confidence in your thesis that, hey, having rotational beers increases the overall portfolio strength, because, hey, maybe I tried the seasonal and now, you know what, I'm going to get really interested in a couple of their core products. But um, you know that uh, that really comes down to being able to show, distributors are, Brewers are get into the business of brewing because they love making beer. Making a business is often the second thought. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
there's a chance here that I can make a living making beer. That sounds fantastic. Now, how do I get into the business side of beer? The logistics, operations, finance, and cost of goods sold, and all that stuff. Um, but the distributors, may come from an aspect of I want to promote craft products and I want to kind of spread the gospel, so to speak, of these products. But they are more business. They have more business in their DNA, and they're more kind of numbers and data driven by their DNA than most breweries. Now we're obviously brushing with a broad stroke here, but um, if you're going to actually, this is a great example. Last night I met with a craft brewery here in Singapore. Um, the founder just appointed a distributor. The business is 2 years old now, but what he did was he got the business to a threshold of X dollars per month in revenue. And he kind of said, okay, I've kind of proven that it's a good business. But now we could go talk to distributors and say, hey, I'm bringing, X tens of thousands of dollars a month in revenue. Who's interested in my product? So he could talk to different distributors, and he had people who were interested in it because he was bringing something to the table. He could also speak to seasonals and these kind of things that kind of said, yeah, I have the data to back this up, and you should be interested in this too because of this. And I think that's kind of the fundamental rub, is that if you haven't ever distributed the beer yourself, you don't know what those numbers look like and feel like. You don't know the impact of those kind of rotational beers and what's the value add of making new products at the whatever pace you've set for yourself. And having never done it, I guess the other thing is having never done it, you don't know what your distributor should be doing. You know, if you've literally walked in their shoes and done the work, you can have more candid conversations with them because you're not just empathizing. Like, not only am I trying to envision myself walking in your shoes, we did this in this market in this way for this time, and this is what we got. So it gives you a much better perspective of, and kind of as you scale, of what works, what doesn't work. Um, and I personally, I would own my home market. If I were a craft brewery, I would want, if I were a craft brewery in Louisville, Kentucky, I would want my beer on tap at the top 25 bars in town. I'd be working very hard to make that happen. I'd be activating and trying out different things because I'm creating the playbook. Because my distributors over in Tennessee might be going, hey, listen, we see what you guys are doing up there. We're interested in the product and considering taking it on. But what can you do for us as a distributor to help support us? And if you can go to them and say, here's my playbook of the different activations we're doing with different bars, here's different events that we're doing, we can push out a playbook to you. Funnily enough, Don Papa is an amazing brand at this. They have a brand portal where, as a distributor, you get access to digital assets, events, and different things that different people around the world are doing. And it's a really solid library of digital media that you can deploy and kind of make your own in your home market. So they're empowering you as the distributor to succeed, and as a brand owner, that's really strong. So, like, I think that's something that another reason why self-distributing is really nice is that you can feed into your other distributors and help them be more successful. Because fundamentally, if if you make it easier for them, if you're constantly giving them ideas, assets, and even manpower, stopping by and helping to do stuff and going out and around town with them and stuff, they're gonna love you. They have 50 other brands, so if you can stand out in some way because you empower them, or then that's only going to help. But that only comes from having done the thing yourself.
I think it comes very practically to the idea of, are you going to make their job easier or harder? And if you can say, hey, look, I've done it, I have proof this way works better, just do it this way, you're going to be fine. They're going to say, oh, hey, this is easy. If I know it works, I'm going to go ahead and follow this, the brand book, or these activation guidelines, or, whatever formula that drove you to success. Whereas if you're trying to get them to do something that maybe is outside of their playbook, or maybe to get them to go the extra mile when it comes to representing your brand. Um, it's helpful if you're saying, look, I want to make your job a little bit harder, but I'm going to show you something that will prove that it's, again, the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I've personally seen it play out. Um, Distributors have a lot of brands, so if you can be greasing the wheel instead of the squeaky wheel, your brand's gonna do better.
And I think I'm kind of uniquely positioned to speak on this as I've kind of been in this position before, and helping establish brands, and kind of build off of a central core brand, um, and building onto that in other markets. And one thing that really struck me was kind of the game of telephone that you play whenever you distance someone away from kind of the we'll say the brand brain share.
Yeah,
Um, when we think about what makes craft beer, craft brand so fun, like, again, I'm not much of a beer drinker, but as I go through and I research these brands and I look into them, it's exciting. I look at it. I saw a beer today that was like, dark chocolate cake and raspberry. I don't know how that's possibly a beer flavor. I don't care. I still want to try it. But when you sorry, that note on the strange flavor just completely threw me off for a loop on the point I was getting to. Um, but I was surprised. The point being, though, is that when you kind of distance yourself away from the core of it, they don't really know what they're doing with it. They don't really know how to talk to it, or talk about it, or how to convey it to the people who should talk about it. And I think that there's something to be said for when you take it into your own hands, and you get to do all the fun experimental funky stuff, like making weird flavors or crazy designs in your labels, or alternative marketing campaign ideas for your activations, or whatever it may be. You have all the freedom in your hands to prove that it's a great idea once it's still in your hands.
yeah,
But the moment that you turn it loose, now you kind of have to battle against numbers. Now you kind of have to battle against, well, now you're not talking about your own specific cases numbers. Now it's a game of averages.
yeah,
And I think what makes the craft beer and the craft kind of everything scene really win is people want that funky stuff. Everyone wants the unique, weird, uncommon flavors. And if you're just trying to rely on the people who's responsible for aggregating the funky stuff, they'll never be able to help you distill, what is the winning thing that makes your particular spirit or beer or beverage, stand out amongst the crowd.
yeah. As you're kind of chatting through that the game of telephone is such a great kind of example of what happens. Like, you as the brand owner, you tell the sales team, maybe you tell the sales manager, and it's not even the whole sales team. The leadership of the distributor, and then they're responsible for sharing your brand story with the team, and then that team is sharing it with the bar, restaurant, hotel managers, who then tell that story to their staff, and suddenly you're 4 degrees removed, and we all know 4 degrees removed on the telephone game. And instead of going to Toledo, you end up in Kentucky. um, that's what happens. So I think that's really fascinating. The other thing that you mentioned that kind of reminded me of something, like one of the things that stood out from CBC Craft Brewers Conference was, um, you know, one of the brands we'll talk about later is a craft beer company that is known for making a lot of beers. Just like, they create a lot of beers on an ongoing basis, lots of new beers. But the number of breweries that I was talking to that make, more than 50 new beers a year, like 50 unique new beers every single year, was just mind blowing. It was like, the expectations are really high for this creative outlet. And like, I do think that, there was one of the data scientists who was giving a talk, was like, listen, guys, we're in the craft bubble over here. We are squarely in the middle of it. When you look at the top like 50 beers on the beer advocates top beer list, like the top 50 beers, the average alcohol by volume of those top 50 beers was like 11.5%. Like, that's not your average consumer. And there was the number of Russian imperial stouts on that list was probably more than the average American will have in their entire lifetime, or their entire family will have in their entire lifetime. It was just like, it was very esoteric and niche, but like the industry loves it. And the kind of really committed lovers of beer get super excited about it. But then there's the other aspect of what's everybody kind of drinking. And actually, I think this probably segues very nicely into one of the uh, takeouts, takeaways too, which was the menu slimming. And what does it mean? Because that was one of the other big takeaways that they talked about, was just that, hey, in the last few years, what are bars and restaurants doing now that they're short staffed, trying to make up for a couple of really lean years? Well, one of those things was definitely slimming down the menu. Um, but I think a fun one, as an American who's living abroad, I was amazed that 50% of restaurants in the US don't just have your Coors Light, Bud Light, Budweiser on the menu. They have a craft beer. And they don't just have a craft beer, but 50% of bars and restaurants in the US have a IPA on the menu. Like, just dwell on that for a second. Have an IPA on the menu. That's like, I left 10 years ago and I couldn't find 10 bars in a city of a half a million people that had IPAs on the menu. Well, there was the five craft beer bars, a couple of the beer bars, but like, it was not 50% of restaurants. But, it is now the most prevalent kind of style of craft beer that's floating around. And if we come back to that idea that, hey, bars and restaurants have been suffering for the last few years, and what are they doing about it? Well, their menus are getting smaller. Like, hey, by shrinking your menu, you have to carry fewer ingredients, you have to carry fewer products. It reduces your inventory costs and helps you operate at slightly like better margins, or slightly more tightly in general. Um, but the big one was that it was overwhelmingly the beverage side of the menu where that slimming was taking place. Something like two-thirds of the slimming happened on the beverage side. So that means maybe you had two IPAs or you had two craft beers on the menu, and you had, two reds, two whites, a rosé, and a champagne. Now you're going to have one red, one white, one champagne, one rosé. Like, we're only going to have one by the glass. We're going to do everything else by the bottle, because it allows us to narrow it down, carry less inventory, and just direct people into certain places. Um, but yeah, the beverage side kind of seems to have taken a disproportionate hit, um, over the last few years from that perspective, which I thought was really interesting.
I don't want to be, gloom and doom, kind of on that note, but it does kind of remind me of the other note, just being that with the rise of sort of like these kind of hard ciders and um, kind of, we'll say, alternative hard beverages, you're not just dealing with menu slimming in terms of like the outlet space or in terms of restaurants and whatnot, but you're also dealing in terms of, hey, when retailers are looking to stock up, they're looking to figure out how to improve their margins as well. And for them, that might be saying, all right, well, we're just going to go and carry more product of fewer brands to get a better price on it, so that way we can save a buck or two. And when that comes down to the beverage scene, I mean, is someone going to go for the beer, or are they going to go for the cider, or are they going to go for the twisted tea, or are they going to go for the campaign, or the various other for local? I mean, I can go on and on. The various drinks which taste like Capri Sun, but apparently are very effective at getting you inebriated. Why am I going to go ahead and pick a beer?
Yeah, that fourth category is really exploding, from the all of the RTDs, from the twisted teas to the four locos and everything in
Mhm.
between, and but the seltzers too. Um, it is, and as you say, there is limited shelf space in these stores. So you have to pick and choose how much space you're going to dedicate to different people, and not always an easy decision. Has the seltzer craze kind of passed its peak? Is White Claw no longer going to be? We're coming up to the summertime, which seems to be White Claw season. We'll see if it still has another big year. But you also have seen, and I think this is a really interesting business decision or portfolio construction from a brewery perspective. A lot of breweries have said, "Hey, I can make a seltzer," and kind of got into the game and said, rather than swimming upstream and fighting the trend, why don't I get in on it and kind of do my own take on a really truly delicious, ingredient driven, like craft seltzer that will scratch the itch that people are looking for, but I don't feel like I'm selling my soul to and InBev to make it happen. So I think you know it's always such a balance, and being aware of the trends, not always reacting to it, and and engrossing yourself in the trends, but being aware of the trends and knowing when to pick and choose, when to dip your toes in and when not to, is is one of the challenges of kind of what are you making from a product perspective.
I think you hit the nail on the head there because it's very I think it's very easy for, let's say, kind of a serious distiller to think like, oh, I'm not going to bother with making a ready to drink mass market kind of cocktail in a can, which even sounds kind of like it almost sounds like it has a lack of sophistication to it. Um, but when you think about it, it's like, well, who's going to drink it? Because I'll tell you, I think you know both of us we work in F&B. We talk about this. We both in personal and professional pursuits like go after any opportunity we can to explore in this world. Um, I'm not too good at turning my nose up at a White Claw. Like, I'll go ahead and if a friend's saying, hey, I got a White Claw, you want one? I'm like, oh, do you have mango? And
Black cherry,
and that's gonna
please.
be and that's gonna be my approach. And I think that that doesn't also preclude me from other situations, me saying, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and have a lovely craft cocktail that's really gonna be involved and take a lot of time to put together. They're not mutually exclusive in terms of their target audience. And I think that by saying, hey, you know what? Let's say in the case of Hendrix, if they said, I'm going to go and do a ready to drink seltzer, for me, I'm like, oh, cool. I'll go ahead and try it out. And I bet that for a lot of my friends who don't, who aren't kind of like gin heads like me and who aren't really into it, I could probably introduce them to maybe some of the more crafty or serious pursuits, using that as kind of an entry point or vehicle.
I I think that uh, the right product in the right place and time. You know, don't always have you know bottles of spirits around. You don't always want to lug it around. Like if you're going for a picnic, you're going to the beach, you're going to do different things. There are different products that fit better for those spaces. And depending on what your brand is, thinking about how are we of this place. If you're a super high end cocktail bar, or a top shelf spirit, maybe making beach seltzers doesn't make sense. But if you're kind of a lifestyle brand trying to reach people in the masses, then maybe it does make a ton of sense. And maybe your brewery's kind of style is, maybe you're in a kind of beach town, or you're in a ski town, like, and you can think of, does this fit with my brand overall? And if it does, and it feels right, and you can do it in a way that feels authentic to you as the producer, then as a consumer, I'm excited about having not just the White Claw choice, but you know, my local craft brewery is doing a seltzer. Sometimes I don't want the 350 calorie stout. I just want, it's a hot day. I want to crush a 75 calorie seltzer, that's refreshing, delicious, and I feel like I can have a couple of without having to go run on the treadmill for a couple hours. I'm old.
Or alternatively, that you could have a couple of them without, you know, careening into your sofa and passing out for the evening. I feel like that's also an option considering some of the alcohol volumes you're quoting.
The U.S. like the U.S. craft beers, that was a big reminder. Like in Australia, Asia, the craft breweries even included, you're kind of seldom getting into beyond the 6 or 7%. I feel like every beer I drank in America was 7% or up, and it was just real. It was just like an eye opener. I kind of almost forgot a couple times, like, wow, I'm kind of feeling this. What's going on? Like, oh, it's 8.6%. That'll do it.
No wonder, no wonder you were in such a good mood when you were in America. Finally, the mystery's revealed. Um,
It doesn't hurt.
I imagine it wouldn't. I can tell you this is certainly, doing the
Yeah.
trick.
Yeah.
I assure you to the viewers, this is not prop or stunt alcohol. I do all my own stunts. This is the real life, real deal thing here. So to transition past it, I think we've kind of gone on for some time, kind of on the importance of brand building, and I think that's where sort of all these points we're getting into of hey, no one's saying not to work with a distributor, but if you don't go into it with at least having answers to these questions or a springboard for these situations, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think that'd be fair to say.
Yeah.
But I also think, and kind of to put my marketer hat on, um, it's really tough to distinguish yourself. I mean, if let's say in my mind when I try and think about this situation, I imagine like an imaginary store shelf. There's six spaces. Okay, how do I design a craft beer that is going to fit inside that can holder and stand out? What is it that's going to make one spirit or alcohol brand stand out among the rest? Because I know they're good at it. I can tell because as a connoisseur of the market, I can see the wins. I can appreciate how fun and fresh and unique these different designs and packaging and stories and names and a lot of things, which especially again marketer hat, they kind of defy a lot of the conventions of what you should do or how you should approach um, you know brand building. But you know, I guess that begs a question. Like, let's say that you're in the position of you're now in the driver's seat. You maybe have the flavor stuff down. That's been that's been in the driver's seat prior to having a name for it, having an idea for a business. You were all about the flavor beforehand, but now you already have the flavor, and it's time to get serious about the business. Where do you get started with the brand?
Yeah. So, like along those lines, when you're talking about store shelves, I have to mention I was in Lincoln, Nebraska. So, city of about 250, 300,000 people. And in one shopping mall, less than, a couple hundred yards apart, there were two alcohol superstores that were each 10,000 square feet. Like, think of Best Buy, think of Walmart. They were that big. Now, you're one of 100 beers on that shelf, 1,000 spirits on the shelf, or wines on the shelf. Like, to your point, how do you stand out? And I love your point about you've been making good beer. So many people are making good beer and then pouring it in their tap room, right? Well, when you pour it in the tap room, you like get out the chalkboard and you're like, Jeff's new awesome lager. And you write it on the chalkboard. You don't have to do, there's a lot of work. As soon as you want to distribute it, it goes from a name on a chalkboard to you have to build a brand for that beer and for each individual beer. And if you're making 30 or 40, 50 beers a year, oh, that's a lot of brand creation. So, what are our categories here? We're going to talk about kind of some of our favorites, right?
Yes. So I thought in a way to sort of maybe narrow in onto what makes for a good brand, we maybe give some examples. Um, and so to start off, and Jeff, I'm happy to take the lead, or
Yeah.
you can lead us off. But the first in the category is best packaging.
Mm, yeah.
Shall
By all
I?
means. By all means. Are you gonna pull out
All
Del
right.
Papa?
I'm not. I feel like, again, for the viewers, they're not paying me, so there's a limit to how much I can plug them for free. It is my favorite rum, but there are limits. Um, no, actually, one of my favorite bottle packagings is and I have okay. This one's a bit of a unique pick, and that's kind of why it's the pick.
Oh,
Luxardo Maraschino liqueur,
yeah.
and I love how there's a few things I love about it. The cap being kind of this unique, almost like lacquered. He's just for the viewers again. Maraschino cherries are like $4 a cherry in Taiwan. Impossible for me to get to, so I'm just watching in jealousy as Jeff enjoys. Um, but yes, the nice red lacquered cap, the kind of like old school green bottle, and then I can't get enough of the weave wrapped um, outside of it. I just think it adds so much class to it, and it looks really cool in my home bar.
Yeah, it's a special one.
Which I think looking cool in the home bar, underrated metric.
Well, speaking of which, I didn't think I was going to be able to find this because I didn't have one in my liquor cabinet at home. But I went to call on a client today, or a prospective client today, and she's like, "I got to finish up my last meeting." They happen to run a bottle shop, and they've got 5 or 6 locations around Singapore. And I'm sitting there. I can kill 10 minutes in a bottle shop pretty easily, just kind of checking out what's going on. And she had it, or they had it. So I picked up. This is Isle of Harris, and
I love them.
it is such a beautiful bottle. They did such a great job. You know it infused with sugar kelp, and then you have this beautiful kind of coloration in the base that permeates through the bottle. The spiraling, the uniqueness of the bottle is pretty special. Um, and like they're representative of a class of distillers that are still kind of popping up. That these guys are making whiskey. This is the classic. If you want to be a whiskey distiller, what do you start off doing? You start off making gin while you're waiting for your whiskey, because whiskey takes time. And actually, that will come back again later in the conversation. But they're making whiskey, but my goodness, this is a beautiful bottle and delicious gin. It really is pretty special. Um, yeah. So it just, and how do you stand out on a shelf? Like, how can you not walk by that and be like, oh my goodness, what is
It's a
that?
beach in a bottle.
Yeah.
For
And if I,
everything from the sand cork to the blue, like it's a beach in a bottle.
if I were running a cafe, I'd be buying these bottles to drink down so I could turn these into my table water bottles. And I'd replace this little label with my cafe's label, peel off the other stuff, and I'd just put these on every table and be like, oh, people are like, that's a beautiful bottle. What's the story? And then I would tell them that I made it and lie. No, I'm just kidding.
Drink a lot of gin. That's the story. Deal with it.
I only have to drink 15 or 20 bottles to have one for every table. No big deal.
It was a busy opening weekend. Uh,
Yeah.
but
How,
no, absolutely. I really, when I saw that, I'm like, it's and it's funny because if I were to look at that, if you were to say, hey, it's a glass work, well, I've seen a lot of bottles with glass work. Cool, but like whatever. I don't know. I've seen it. It's when you see a lot of it, you also kind of think like it's just not that individual element itself is not going to wow me. So there's nothing really that special about just the individual striations at all. There's nothing special about like maybe like having a unique colored cork or a unique colored bottle to it or bottom to it, but all together, it tells a story by itself because I know that gin will suit me for a beach cocktail without ever having to try it. I've never had that one, but I just know that will suit for that purpose.
what's funny too? It evokes a feeling that is so incongruent with where it is. Like it's an island in Scotland. So
I was
like
gonna ask
the
Harris.
sunshine,
Yeah, that
yeah, the sun shines like 12 days a year. It rains 340 days a year. and but the bottle like would work at every single beach bar in the world, and like every single bar in Florida should have that on the shelf because it would just get drank up.
When I heard Harris, I didn't want to delve into the country of origin because I felt like that would go immediately against everything that the bottle was telling me.
No,
But
but it's okay. It's okay. It's not. It's funny, but it works. Like it doesn't. I don't. It doesn't feel incongruent for some reason. So the power of good
I mean,
design.
who's looking at a gin bottle thinking about Scottish climates? Certainly not I.
No.
Um, but moving forward, so we went past best packaging, now on to best label.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
so I have to, in honesty, still go back to my favorite. And this is one which Jeff I shared at a previous late night snacks, but I want to talk about it again because it's so cool. And it's the Lone Wolf Gin. As you can see, I have barely any left, but I'm keeping the bottle for now just because it's so cool. But I thought this was a really like interesting use case. One, because it doesn't have to be super, there's a design in itself, but aside from that, they're not doing anything, unique or crazy with the glass work. It's a
Off the
standard
shelf,
cork,
off
nothing.
the shelf bottle. Yep.
But even as something simple, and I've shared this again in late insights before, but like when you look at the label, and I don't know if it shows up on the camera, but there's a bit of a like reflective kind
Oh
of
yeah, the
quality
gold,
to,
the kind of
yeah.
goldish, orangish elements.
There's like a gold, and again, for someone who's actually worked in printing, I should know how this is done, but I don't. Um, but nonetheless, there's like gold foil in the actual label itself, um, which to me is just such a great example of like a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit of saying, hey, we're going to invest in a great graphic designer. Obviously, someone talented created a great design. We're not going to skimp out on the labels themselves. And, this could be anything, really, the bottle itself. And it wouldn't matter to me just because I saw this. This is what caught my eye.
Yeah. Um, so I went with a beer company, um,
Or the
and
beer company.
yeah. So it's less about the individual label that I'm going to show, and more about them as a brand. So this is Behemoth. This is the Lid Ripper Hazy IPA. Those are little hops kind of ripping out of his head. Um, and standard can, kind of sticker label, um, nothing particular. But what I love about it is Behemoth puts out a ton of beers every year. So they're one of
Mm-hmm.
those brands that's just turning out a couple of beers a month at a minimum. And what I love about it is this is the core kind of central character. And they work this character into every label in different settings and different statutes in different ways. And it kind of it provides this golden thread that ties the brand together and all of these beers together. Because if you make 50 beers in a year, how do you kind of keep them cohesively under a single banner? And I know that that would be really challenging for me to even comprehend. But they've obviously been doing it for years now, and I just think that it's a really fun way to do it. They um, they clearly have some talented design, and it's actually pretty fun because when you go into the store and start looking at their beers, even here in Singapore, I think that there were 12 Behemoth beers for sale at this place, 12 unique SKUs. And I was like, oh my God, that can't be like the full lineup.
Variety.
It's just what the Singapore importer chose to bring in. They're not bringing in every beer that they make, probably, or maybe they are. I guess I could ask them. But I'm a big fan. I thought it was, and I like their product. They make really good beers. Everything I've had from them has been really good, and that just adds to my level of being impressed. Is like, you're making 45, 50 beers a year, and from what I can tell, they're all pretty delicious, and that's just really hard to kind of keep up that consistency and just coming up with label designs. Coming back to our idea of, it's one thing to do 40, 50 beers a year when you're doing it in your tap room and you don't have to build a brand identity around that beer. Just coming up with names for all of these beers, Lid Ripper. Okay. Like, well, you're going to have 4 more hazy IPAs that you do this year. You're going to need 4 more names, 4 more designs. And yeah, I think the sheer volume, they're hitting that kind of alignment of volume, creativity, and kind of quality that is really hard to achieve. So that's what brought them onto my level as kind of best label. It's not just one label; it's the 50 labels that they'll put out in the next 12 months that really kind of all come together.
I have to say, one, great design, looks really fun. I love how they played in the hop imagery. Two, maybe beer brands should be hiring NFT designers because they seem great at just
Oh,
taking an image and doing 50 or more different riffs on it. So that might be the magic thread there.
yeah.
Um, but three, as just a brief kind of interlude, we'll say, you know, I have a bit of a bone to pick, Jeff.
Oh,
In previous late night snacks, you've had the opportunity to switch out different cocktails at whim, and I've been, doing these tipsy travel articles. I'm kind of resigned to one cocktail, and I just, seeing as this time you're taking on tipsy travels, I want to exercise my right to a secondary alternative cocktail. He's going there.
oh, what do you got?
This is just tonic water, but it's part of a
Ooh,
cocktail which will involve this Hendrix Amazonia, which
ah,
I referenced earlier. Now I'm doing what may be a dangerous pour because I'm doing none of this with a jigger and all that fun stuff. This is all eyeball pours.
nobody's tracking your cost of goods sold. Don't worry.
There we go. My inventory is fantastic because I only have to answer to me. But
I have to say, by the way, every once in a while, I'll have a bottle of gin that I just use for Negronis, and a bottle of vermouth, and a bottle of Campari, and that's all that I use them for is making Negronis, and they all finish at exactly the same time at home. And I'm like, wow, my pour game is on point.
and there's one time where if you spill a little bit, you're like, the cycle is broken and it's all ruined. Um, no, not going with the very elaborate or fancy cocktail, but in the theme of kind of going for how with the old fashioned, those of kind of the brown liquor pursuit will use that to gauge kind of the strength of a bar. For me, I use a gin and tonic to gauge the strength of a beverage. So it's
Mm,
a gin and tonic is my way to tell, hey, how really good is a gin. If it can't stand up to the taste of to the taste test of a gin and tonic, it's not a gin worth adding to the arsenal.
fair
So,
enough.
cheers.
Cheers.
And fun stuff. I've been drinking Hendrix for some time now. I'm not going to go too deep on that because I want to introduce our next entry, but I appreciate a line that continues to add in variety. So, on to the last category, which is maybe the antithesis to variety. Um, this is my entry for kind of best brand story, and I couldn't. I literally don't have a second in line. This was the only one that came to mind. Um,
Ah,
Chartreuse. How can you not? I mean, I was reading the Wikipedia page for this today, and the sheer craziness of it, this could be a movie. I mean,
yeah.
the fact that you have like monks stolen away in the night, hiding the recipe, and at one point there was a call for all secret recipes, and it like there was a government inquisition into secret like medicinal recipes that were called in, and the recipe for chartreuse just got rejected. They're like, oh, we know that, which that one clerical error somehow seemed to allow that to retain its copyright throughout the years, and so thus through a crazy turn and twist of events, control of the recipe is still in the hands of monks in the year, oh yeah, 2022. Um, so while we have smartphones and Elon Musk's smart links, androids, Tesla's COVID, all of this fun stuff, we're also sipping on an ancient beverage that I think the last recipe change was in the 1700s. Um, so I think that's always kind of cool when you can just get something like this delivered to your doorstep.
Get medieval on it.
You could get medieval on it with your cocktail game. Absolutely, yes, you could.
Uh, well, I am also a big fan of chartreuse, and I think last time we talked about chartreuse, I was embarrassed that I didn't have a bottle in my house, and I'm still embarrassed, and I still don't have a bottle in my house. But I will remedy that here soon. What I do have a bottle of is uh, one of the first spirits um, that we ever distributed when I was building the distribution business. So it's near and dear to my heart. And funnily enough, the first shipment arrived on the 4th of July, and it's actually an American spirit. It is Westward Whiskey, which is a single malt American whiskey. Um, Christian Krogstad is the distiller, founder of Westward Whiskey, but like so many people, when he started getting into the distilling game, he first made gin. He made a little gin that did pretty well called Aviation American Gin. Um,
Okay, maybe heard of it.
yeah, uh, did very well from a unique bottle design as well. When he tells the story, they had originally Aviation was a bottle not so dissimilar to this, but then they went and did their custom bottle that everybody knows and loves now, the kind of flask style shaped bottle. And he really credits that with as a pivotal moment in the brand's history, where they had a good brand and they were doing good, like they were doing well, but that really changed the trajectory of the product entirely. But the reason I chose this is because it brings together a lot of our customer base and from different places. And I still have craft beer on the mind. Still, whatever, a
Mhm.
couple of weeks after going to the Brewers Conference, whiskey is essentially distilled beer. And when Christian talks about Western whiskey, he talks about the fact that he got his start in craft brewing. And he was a craft brewer for almost a decade before he got into distilling. And most most of the beer that gets distilled into whiskey, nobody would ever drink. It's called distiller's beer, and you'll even see it referenced in like articles and whatnot that say not that you'd ever want to drink it. Well, Christian's whole ethos was I'm going to start with a beer that I'd want to drink, and then make it into a whiskey. So he challenges you to drink the beer off of off the fermenter and kind of straight up and say, try this and see what you think. This is what forms the base of Westward whiskey. And I think for the craft beer audience, this is the single, like, this bridges the gap so amazingly well. Um, and I just love that convergence of, he's up in Portland, Oregon, and we were just looking at kind of craft breweries by like per capita today. And Portland is like, there's only one craft brewery for every four people. I mean, it's just a shame. You
No
just
big
don't have any
deal.
choice. No choice. 120 craft breweries in a city of whatever, a million people or something, if even. Yeah, I don't think Portland's that big. But yeah, so I love it from that perspective. It's very like I'm very nostalgic for it because it really kind of helped us get our start in the distribution game. It's probably the whiskey that I've drank the most of because we started distributing it and we were tasting it and sharing it and tasting it and sharing it and tasting it and sharing it. And it was the only whiskey we had for a long time. So when we wanted whiskey, you go to your portfolio and you got to have that stuff in the on the shelf. So um, beautiful product. And like I said, it really converges the two worlds in a way that almost nothing else does. Um, I haven't met a single person who likes craft beer who's not tasted it and been like, "Ooh, that's really interesting. I really like that." And I actually haven't had a bottle of it in my house for a little while. And I picked this up today, and I just haven't had it. And I'm pretty excited to have some. after I wrap up my night. Um, but yeah, grain to glass, single malt American whiskey, uh, taking a Scottish style, so tying into our previous kind of my previous Isle of Harris, which is making Scottish whiskey, Scottish style, so American malt, single malt, but the convergence of, hey, I started brewing beer, I wanted to start distilling, and I think we'll talk about this more either in some articles or maybe even in the next late night snacks. But that convergence of breweries and distilleries, I think, is another trend that I saw kind of in the very early days at CBC, and people were talking about it. We had some people doing it. Um, the U.S. system isn't really built to support it yet in many ways because the laws are different and it's challenging. But yeah, that's my brand story that really speaks to me, and it's funny because it's 50% nostalgia, 50% story, 50% quality of product.
I think it's funny when you kind of pointed out like, hey, my reasons for picking are not necessarily the most scientific. Like, hey, nostalgia comes into play. Some of it's just kind of this looks cool, but um, that's how we also, as consumers, pick which brands we go to. So I think it's absolutely valid and makes complete sense because we all have those weird, wacky kind of ways of just saying, "Ooh, shiny," or this hits that one particular note that I'm looking for, and then full speed ahead.
Yeah, shamelessly feeling good about this one because I like the
Nothing
bottle.
wrong with that. Um, well, that's fantastic. I do want to say it's a lot of food for thought in terms of the importance, I'll say, on brain building, and kind of the depth of thought. So I think that people look at it and kind of say, make the perfect flavor, and then they look at it like, okay, hey, everything else will maybe come along. Um, but really, I'd say it's perfect flavor, perfect, branding, and kind of the packaging and all of that aspect of it put together. And then there's the whole aspect of like, running the business effectively. And when you have those three, then yeah, sure, like everything else will come along once you have those three. But definitely points to worth the attention, I'll say, and also think it's a fun discussion just in terms of how varied the um, we'll say influences or references are for your case. You love a whiskey because it reminds you of success and the 4th of July. For me, I like a liqueur because it reminds me of monks and you know getting drunk off of medicinal liquors. I mean, it's we all have our levers. But yeah, with that, Jeff, I'll leave you with the last word.
Yeah, it was fun to be back. I really missed doing this last month. Recording fell while I was at Craft Brewers Conference, and timelines obviously didn't work. Um, can't be late night snacks for one person and breakfast for one person. It's just doesn't work. It's just
Morning
incongruent.
shot.
Yeah, although I was drinking beer pretty early during the CBC, but I think we did hit on some great points. You know, controlling your brand, telling your story, owning your home market, building it yourself, and showing the value, and not just saying that my brand is beautiful and powerful because I made it and it tastes good. Having numbers to back it up, and the convergence of all of those things leads you to a good outcome. And I left out one state that I missed on my last that one I forgot to mention one state that I visited on my trip, which is Iowa, um, and the place of my birth, but it's also the place of Field of Dreams. Famous tagline: building. If you build it, they will come. If you brew it, they will come. Does not work. You have to do a whole bunch of other stuff for it to work. So, on that note, it's been a pleasure as always, and thank you for organizing, Emilio. And I look forward to next month.
Right on. Likewise, and looking forward to more discussion and sharing about the wonderful world of F&B and what it is we can learn and enjoy. So to that note, cheers.
Cheers. All right.